What was said? Science. Oh, yeah. Hey, good morning, everyone. If I haven't had a chance to meet you, my name is Joe, and I'm the pastor here, and we've made it. You're here. I want to recognize everyone who's running today, and all of those who are cheering, especially. Not especially, I guess, but I just feel like running, you're kind of already signing up to be uncomfortable. Cheering, then you're also uncomfortable. I just feel like extra sympathy for the cheerers. But no, we're really grateful to have a community, many who are either participating in the marathon. So grateful for you all being here. We're in a series right now on the spiritual journey, and this is the last week of it. And we've been talking through these various stages that people experience often in a spiritual journey. And we started with this idea of discovering God, awakening to the God who is already here. We talked about what it means to learn about God and the words that we choose to describe who God is and how that creates meaning in our lives. We talked about what it's like to build a worldview, where we begin to interpret the whole world through some of these things that we learn, often at a pretty young age, and we view the world that way. And then last week, we talked about what it is to question that worldview, what it means to wrestle and to ask those big questions and to find the incongruencies in what we had just accepted as truth. And today, as we finish this series, I'm going to talk briefly on what it means to embrace the paradox of our faith. And I'm really asking the question, how do you know you've arrived? How do you know you've arrived? I would say that in the spiritual journey, you probably don't arrive. Although I do need to say that as United Methodists in the Wesleyan tradition, we hold loosely the belief that you can reach perfection. Anyone here there already? Dan, if you want to come up and just finish the sermon then. But more modern scholars, it's something John Wesley taught. It's a part of the experience of the Christian faith where you're saved. God's grace meets us where we are, what we call prevenient grace, and then we're saved and brought into the family of God, what we might call justifying grace, and then sanctifying grace is the grace of God in our lives to make us whole. And John Wesley believed that you should just assume that you can reach complete wholeness. So not perfection as a standard, but wholeness. And I've heard it explained by modern scholars as not necessarily being perfect, but being perfect in love. That you've grown in your ability to love perfectly, which might be a part of wholeness. But I want to ask the question, how do you know you arrived? Or maybe a better question is not how you've arrived, how do you know you've arrived, but how do you know you're going in the right direction? Because I think what happens in our faith life, and we have had some sort of behind-the-scene conversations or after-church conversations, especially last week when I suggested that your faith really doesn't become your own until you've challenged it. And what we were talking about with some of the people, just some casual conversations, was this idea that questioning your faith is viewed in some places as backsliding. Whereas I suggested it was very much forward sliding. That questioning it, wrestling with it, and having those honest conversations with ourselves and with other people and with God is an important part of our faith to help us move forward. But some people might look at us and say, well, you're heading in the wrong direction. How dare you question that which I know for certain? So how do you know you're going in the right direction? Well, I'm going to offer some suggestions in that. I had the chance this last weekend to spend some time at the Methodist Theological School of Ohio, known as MTSO. It's up in Delaware, and I get to participate in a series of workshops around trauma-informed ministry and hear from a couple of professors, one of which has been in the United States for the last 30 years, but it is originally from continent of Africa. And she shared this illustration very briefly that I've just been sitting with. He said, you know, in his country, they would travel. Everything was separated really far, and the roads weren't great. So you're traveling for a really long way before you get to a village. But they knew they were close to a village when they saw palm trees. Because palm trees only grew where there was water. And if there was water, then usually there'd be a village. And so as you're driving along this road and you start seeing palm trees in the distance, you're like, oh, a village is coming up. We'll be able to get gas. We'll be able to get water. We'll be able to, the things that we need. And so I want to suggest some similar for our spiritual journey. What are some of the palm trees? What are some of the things that when you see them, you'll know that you're heading in the right direction? The first one is this. I think when this becomes true for you, it'll be a good sign that we're heading in the right direction. Number one, you believe in something you don't feel the need to defend. You believe in something that you don't feel the need to defend. Some of my thoughts today come from theologian Richard Rohr. I know we have some fans in the house. But Richard Rohr wrote a book called Falling Upward, and I'll share a couple of thoughts from that book, where he really talks about what it means to grow in our faith in the ways in which that really happens by first, partly by questioning what you believe. But one of the things he says early on in his introduction is this. He says, the very fact that so many, and I think I have a slide for this, Tim. The very fact that so many religious people have to so vigorously prove and defend their salvation theories makes one seriously doubt whether they have experienced divine love. I've never walked away from an argument where I felt I had to defend what I believed, feeling better about myself. The very nature of defending an idea, and I'm not talking about standing up for yourself, all right? So, setting boundaries and saying, hey, this is not okay. I'm not talking about defending yourself or standing up for yourself. I'm talking about standing up for ideas that we believe. The very idea of defending an idea like that assumes that it's under attack. And the simple truth about faith is that you can't actually attack my faith. You don't have that much power. And what I love about the faith that I'm trying to grow into is that God is bigger than my ability to justify. That God is bigger than my need to defend. Friends, God doesn't need you to defend God. I have found that the sincerity of my belief and the strength of what I believe is not made stronger through defense, but through quiet acceptance. You see, there's this sense of when I get defensive, what it's revealing in me is my own insecurity. I have to remind myself, I can't control what other people think. I can't control what other people believe. I'm not God. Oh, what a relaxing idea. What a truly beautiful thing to believe. And so there's this posture with your fist that's ready to throw a punch, a theological punch, and there's a lot of people throwing theological and political punches these days. It's good for Facebook followers and Instagram followers. But I find that my faith is actually strengthened when I release my fist and I just, God is. Be still and know that I am God. Try it. Form a fist. Just the simple act of squeeze as tight as you can, and it represents everything that you want to believe, and you're going to convince everyone of it, and then release it and just open your hands like this. You can just sense the change in posture. Jesus was put on trial for what he did while on earth, for what he said about God, for the ways in which he challenged the Roman Empire and the religious establishment. And when he was put on trial at a young age, I read the scriptures and I would get a little frustrated. I would say, Jesus, if you just defended yourself a little better, you could have gotten off. Build a better case. I love a courtroom drama. I can handle the truth, right? And so just argue it better. Have you read the stories where Jesus is on trial? He doesn't make a compelling case at all to the authorities. At one point, they're like, and he's like, if that's what you say. And I'm like, what? It's more complicated than that, Jesus. But Jesus had arrived. And he could just, he knew he didn't have to defend or argue, that it wouldn't produce the results he wanted to see. So number one is, you know you're heading in the right direction if you believe in something that you don't get defensive about. You can just accept it. Number two is you understand the rules you're breaking. This is really important. Richard Rohr talks about in his book, Falling Upward, how we have two halves of life. The first half is kind of learning all of the structures and building a container that we can hold our lives. So we have all these structures and stuff that we have to learn. And the second half of the life is really kind of challenging that structure and figuring out what we're going to fill in it and having those bigger conversations. So, and the idea here is very similar. Like, think about it like this. You might say to children, here's a rule that you might say to children: don't talk to strangers. And it's a relatively okay rule. I have similar conversations with my son. I'm not as overt as don't talk to strangers, but we live in a neighborhood where I need him to understand that not everyone on the other side of the fence is a safe person. And so, to have healthy relationships and to not answer the door if someone comes to the door. This is just the world that we live in. It's the neighborhood that I live in. And so we have that. Now, so I'll say to Finn something similar, not quite as overt as don't talk to strangers, but I'll say something like that. But then to you all, as adults, as a pastor, one of the things that I preach on regularly is, will you please go and talk to strangers? Go find someone you don't know and learn from them. Introduce yourself. Experience something different. Listen to somebody that you don't understand. Like, literally, the big sermon for Christians is go and love strangers, right? I mean, that's kind of like at the heart of the gospel. And so, what we learn as children doesn't always apply to adults. But this is what Richard Rohr says about the two halves of life. He says this, and I think I have a quote. Yet the two halves are cumulative and sequential, and both are very necessary. He says, you cannot do a nonstop flight to the second half of life by reading lots of books about it, including this one. Grace must and will edge you forward. And then I love this. God has no grandchildren. God has only children, as some have said. God has no grandchildren, only children. Last week we looked at Jacob wrestling with God. And that's when God became Jacob's personal God. He said, the God of Israel, the God of Jacob, is after that wrestling experience. We can't vicariously wrestle with God through Jacob's story. We have to have that experience ourselves. We can't be grandchildren to God. We have to be children. And part of it is learning the rules before we break them. So teenagers, we've got a few. Teenagers, by the nature of development, want to break the rules to see what happens. You're testing it out. Elders break the rules because they know better. And this is part of what it means to grow in wisdom. So in art class, we would always learn, eventually you have to develop your own style in art class. And I loved art class through high school and into college. And you want to develop your own style, your own personality. You had to figure out how to set yourself apart as a fine artist. But the only way to do that was to first learn the correct way to draw, the correct way to paint. Now, if that's as far as you got, if you only ever painted the right way, you wouldn't make it as an artist. At the same time, if you didn't learn those rules, you wouldn't make it as an artist. It was the two halves that were essential. First, you had to kind of learn this is how it works, and then you had to kind of break those rules, but you're doing it intentionally because you understand them. Here's what I mean by that in regards to theology. I went to a workshop once on LGBTQ inclusion, and this pastor was talking about how churches that became inclusive would statistically stop being a church a few years later. The church would close. And he said one of the big reasons for this was in the process of becoming inclusive, they kind of just threw all of their theology out the door. And next thing you know, they didn't have anything that brought them together. They didn't have any theology to hold their community together. And his argument in this workshop, which was about how to church to become inclusive, was you have to do the theological work. There are actually phenomenal books out there that argue that the history of the Christian church and the teachings of Scripture show us that we should be inclusive. And that theology is really important. It's not about just throwing out the rules. It's about better understanding them. This is how Jesus said it. In his Sermon on the Mount, he says this about 5 different times. You have heard it said. You have heard that it was said. And he quotes something from the Old Testament. And then he reinterprets it. Do you know any of the you have heard it said passages that are here? There's 5 different ones. See how many we can get. I actually don't have them in front of me, so we'll find out together. Yeah, you have heard it said, love your neighbor, but kill your enemies. And he says, but I say to you what? Love your enemies. Think of any others? Adultery's in there. Divorce, I think, is in there. Murder. I think there's vows, something about vows. You have heard it said, don't swear to the Lord. And what he's doing here is he's not throwing out those old rules. He's understanding them and then dissecting them and then teaching something different. So he knows which rules he's breaking. Number 3, you no longer asking the question, is this true? You're asking the question, is this loving? One of the ways you know you're headed in the right direction. I'm not talking about facts here. We live in a world of disinformation. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the big ideas, the abstract ideas around what we believe, the things you can't prove one way or the other. It's not about certainty here. It's about what is most loving. Jesus was once asked, what is the greatest commandment? What's the greatest commandment in the law? And what did Jesus say? He said, actually, he gave us 2 commandments that were greatest. Love God and love your neighbor. And he goes on, he says, all of the law and the prophets, which was code for the entire Hebrew Bible. So the entire Hebrew Bible hangs on these 2 commandments, which is a way of saying that what is right hangs on this question. Is it loving? Is it loving? Number 4, you know your limits and you embrace grace and mystery. Isaiah 55, 8-9 says it like this, for my thoughts are not your thoughts. I think I have a slide for this. Maybe. If not, I'll read it. Isaiah 55, 8-9 says, for my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. One of the things I love about the Hebrew Bible is this belief that you see scattered throughout where God is truly the other. God is mysterious, almost unknowable. We only know God because God chooses to reveal God's self to us, but there's this mystery. Or how the road manager for AC/DC said it once. Similar phrase. I think I have a slide for this too, hopefully. God is the name of the blanket we throw over mystery to give it shape. He was the road manager for the rock band AC/DC, but he did eventually become an Episcopal priest, and I just love everything about this slide. Like, what in the world? But it's a beautiful little proverb, God is the name of the blanket we throw over mystery to give it shape. I find that part of growing and maturing is recognizing that we don't know everything. One of the best lines is somebody who's grown in maturity is to say, I don't know. This illustration was given to me in undergrad, and I've held on to it ever since. I've shared it before, but it's the law of limited knowledge. As the diameter of what you know increases, the circumference of what you don't know also increases. So first off, we have to learn what diameter and circumference is. I have to look this up. So
I was like, I got to make sure I got this right. So I Googled that, and diameter, of course, is the length, the distance between the inside of a circle, right? That's the diameter, and the circumference is the length of the circle. And as you grow in your knowledge of a particular topic, the more you realize how much there is to know about everything else. And this is true for especially true for like a PhD candidate. And we've got a few in the house today. You have to move the needle of a very specific niche topic just a little bit. But if you're growing in knowledge and humility, you'll also realize that that other people are moving the needle in all of the other areas of the world. And that the more you know, hopefully you're realizing the more you don't know. And hopefully that creates a little bit of humility. I have found that the more arrogant someone is about what they believe, often means they know very little about it. The more arrogant someone is about what they believe, it often means, not always, but it often means they know very little about it. And so growing in wisdom means simply learning to say, I don't know. Can we try that together? You guys feel comfortable saying, I don't know? I don't know. I don't know. I'll say that that's hard for me. I had a chance to sit with some seminary students, and I wanted them to think I was smart. And we were talking about church and evangelism, and it's for United Methodist Evangelism class at Candler, and they're like, the professors leave lots of time for questions because they like to ask a lot of questions. And I said, it's great. So we had about 30 minutes for questions, and this one person asked me, she's not American by birth. She's in the States for education, and she says, the churches I serve, and I forget where she's originally from, but the churches I serve back home aren't really even churches. They're mostly just gatherings of people, sometimes just under a tree or, in a community space, and there's only a few people that are in that church, and they can't really afford a pastor. What advice would you have for a church like that? And I almost gave her advice, I almost was like, well, here's what I would do. Woo! But I caught myself. And I first said, look, I would be very hesitant to give advice to somebody in a completely different culture than my own. And then I went on to give her advice. But my point is that it's really tempting to want to think you have the answers, and it's really wise. And one of the ways you know you're arriving is to say, I don't know. Here are some ideas I have. Share them, but approaching it from a place of humility. So far, this is what we've covered. You'll know you're on the right direction when, one, you believe something that you don't need to defend, that you have a sense of security about what you believe. Number two, that you understand the rules you're breaking. Like if you're going to play around with the Christian faith or our theology, you're not doing it just because you want to break the rules. You're engaging in meaningful conversations. You understand the historic faith, and you're doing it intentionally. And there's ways to do that. It's really, really meaningful. Number three, you're no longer asking the question, is it true? You're asking the question, is it loving? And number four, you know your limits and you embrace grace and mystery for the places and things that you don't know. The last one is simply, you know you are loved. Friends, you are loved. That's just true. In fact, look at me. Seriously, you're loved. And you're loved, and you're loved, you are loved. You are loved. believing that's true and knowing it for yourself are sometimes wildly different things. And this is probably the hardest part of growing in faith for me, is living out of the simple fact and the simple belief that I'm not as bad as I thought I was. That I'm not as broken as I thought I was. That I'm not as... Wouldn't it be great to live life not feeling inadequate? Not feeling or afraid that you're going to fail? Feeling, and I know some of you are like looking at me like, I'm not afraid I'm going to fail. I'm like, well, I am. Like often, pretty often. Maybe you're afraid of other things, but wouldn't it be great to be able to live a life where you know you are loved? And this is the great thing about love, is it doesn't remove the possibility of failure. It changes how we experience it. To know that you could really, truly mess up and people would still love you. That God still loves you. My professor was talking about these palm trees, right? And he says, as soon as we saw palm trees off in the distance, we knew a village was coming up, and he was talking about hope. How these palm trees were a symbol of hope. That like, we're going to reach a village soon. We're going to make it. And he was painting this picture of hope for our class. And of course, the palm trees are there because of water, and water meant life. And I think that is ultimately my invitation to you all, whatever your spiritual journey looks like, is it leading to life? Is it leading to goodness, patience, and kindness, and grace? Jesus makes it very clear in the New Testament. You'll know a tree by its fruit. Is your spiritual life producing life, goodness, patience, kindness? These are some of the markings that I've noticed in my life that I'm trying to grow towards. There are many others, but I invite you to consider for yourself what those palm trees are. How do you know you're heading in the right direction? How do you know that you're growing in your ability to love God and love others? I'm going to invite the band to come up, and as they get ready for the closing song, I invite you to, if you feel so led, to take your fist. You might be so mad at what I'm saying. Joe, I know I'm such a science. Some sort of inside joke that I'm not even a part of. And release your fist, and I encourage you to just open your hands and place them in your lap as a sign of what it means to receive what God has to give you today. And let us pray. God, we know that we're all on our own little journeys, and we trust that you are big enough to meet us wherever we are. More than anything, God, we ask that you would come and shower your love upon us. Show us what it means to be known and to be loved. Show us what it means to grow in our ability to love one another, to grow in grace, to press on, to become people of mature, whole spirituality. Show us the way. In your name we pray.